Hello, beautiful souls. And so we have arrived at the first episode of the Daughters of Ajay podcast. I'm so excited to have you listening in. I thought it would be beneficial to those of you who are new to my community to dedicate this first episode to speaking a bit to what Ajay is and a little about who I am and how I arrived here. So for those of you who may not be familiar at all with African spiritual traditions, or specifically traditions of Yoruba people, the concept of Ajay is rooted in the spiritual cosmology of Ifa, which is a spiritual philosophy, a divination practice, and a belief system that is indigenous to the Yoruba peoples of West Africa. So let's not forget that pre-colonial Africa was not divided into the land masses that make up the countries that we know, the African countries that we know of today. Yoruba peoples were spread far and wide beyond Nigeria to the West African region formerly known as Yoruba land. But the word Ajay itself does come from the Yoruba language, and it denotes a phenomenal power akin to psychic sense or the primordial force of the cosmos. In our neo-colonial world, unfortunately, Ajay is now often maligned with witchcraft, with negative connotations of devil worship, evil, and benevolence, all of which is primarily rooted in colonial patriarchal oppression. So if we just zoom back or zoom out a little bit, I just want to speak to the fact that, you know, part of why this podcast has come into being is in support of our collective reclamation of our traditions, because spiritual and cultural warfare have always been the bedrock of settler colonialism. Ever since the doctrine of discovery, a decree which was actually issued by the Roman Catholic Church right back in 1493, and this decree was sanctioned by dominant political and cultural institutions. It served as a driver for conquest and the expansion of Christian supremacy. Under this ideology, our ancestral traditions were deemed sinful, immoral, evil, and they were buried, right? Our ancestors were forced by missionaries who settled in several parts of Africa. I'm going to speak specifically to Nigeria. They were forced to relinquish their belief systems. Now, I also want to mention that although Ajay comes specifically from the Yoruba cosmology of Ifa, Nigerian people practice a multitude of different faiths. So you have folks who practice voodoo, folks that practice Ifa. You know, it's a multi-faith country, as is a lot of the continent. So with this demonization, many African people were indoctrinated into monotheistic Abrahamic faiths, right? So we then saw the indoctrination of Christianity and Muslim Islamic faiths. But it truly was our rebellious ancestors, right, who syncretized these faiths with Christianity and their other practices, who practiced underground, who maintained their beliefs in secret. It was our spiritual technology that directly intervened with settler expansion, and we have to really praise the preservation of our indigenous cultural traditions for being the backbone of resistance, right? I really believe that our practices, our rituals, our cosmologies are blueprints for liberation. They are the scaffolding for the legacies of liberation and revolution theology that have guided many of our historic, prolific leaders from capture to emancipation, from colonized to liberated. When we look at the warrior queens of Africa like Nzinga and Ya Ashantewa, who led rebellions and stood against patriarchal colonial forces, to Nat Turner in America's, Southampton insurrection, all the way across to Jamaica, Queen Nanny, who emancipated the Maroons from British imperialist settlers, Harriet Tubman and her abolitionist activism, and then over to Haiti, where Cecile Fatima prophesied the Haitian revolution. She was a voodoo priestess who prophesied the revolution during a traditional ceremonial ritual. So historically, we have evidence that the most notable revolts of Black people, the liberation work of our collective diasporic freedom fighters and revolutionary leaders, were all rooted in a faith that liberation was possible, that a world where they could be free was possible, and they solidified this with their faith. They solidified this with their practices of conjure, of ancestral veneration, and they collaborated with the forces of the divine. Knowing these stories of resistance, of spiritual repression and criminalization really serve as a reminder that our connection to spirit and the ways of our ancestors and our ancient cosmologies and traditions will never be lost. Slavery and colonization, white supremacy have attempted time and again to disconnect us from our wisdom and delegitimize the traditions of our people. In fact, the oppressors themselves have set us up over the centuries to disavow our own technologies, to adopt their faiths, their ideologies, their worldviews as a way to control and dominate us, not only spiritually, but politically. So I really see that in reclaiming our cultural and faith-based traditions, we put revolution into practice. We emancipate our spirit from the capture of colonial capitalist modernity. We allow ourselves to dream into being the full breadth of our Afro-futurist longings. I also really want to mention that these historically demeaning associations were also a patriarchal strategy to specifically oppress and subjugate the feminine. In reality, Ajé is a force inherent in both genders, though due to our life-bearing biological nature as women, Africana women are seen as its owners and controllers. So not only is Ajé essential to human creation, artistic creativity, psychic sense and ability, but it's also seen as a force of justice, balance, and divine order. This makes sense as it's in line with the natural forces of Mother Nature and our planet Earth, the order of the cosmos and our universe. So Ajé in of itself can be seen as it's, a phenomenal sort of entity in itself, and is a force and sacred gift that can be imbued into us humans due to our inherent divinity. So it's seen as a holistic biological spiritual power that can be used in a myriad of ways depending on who is wielding the power and the circumstances and motivations dictating their actions. So us spiritually empowered humans are known as Ajer. We are those that are chosen, and there's some that are initiated by the supreme arcane feminine forces themselves, who are considered to be the architects of existence. These divine mothers are called Àwọn Iyawa or Iyami Osoranga, meaning our mothers and the great mysterious mothers, respectfully. These are the primordial wombs of creation. These supreme and powerful mother deities are the source of this cosmic phenomena and are both feared and revered. So they have many praise names, these mothers, including Iyami, which literally means my mother, or Iyami Ajer, which can be translated as the super powerful ones. And the mothers are known to be harbingers of justice and balance. They are the ones that imbue us here in the physical with Ajer. But I also want to highlight the fact that though many of us Africana women, women of the diaspora, are imbued with this divine force, this sacred gift, not many of us are actively utilizing it or aware of it due to the historic demonization of feminine intuition, due to the harms and traumas that we carry in our epigenome, right? So many of us shun our inner voices, but it's far more expansive than intuition, right? These are psychic gifts that encompass what we know in Eurocentric terms as the 5 clairs, for example, but you know, which is claircognizance, clairsentience, clairvoyance, and so on. But this also encompasses telepathy and loads of other gifts. So I also want to make note of the fact that Ajer is vast, and so are the Iyami, and speaking about them requires a lot of nuanced detail and in-depth explanations, which brings me to highlight that whilst this podcast is to serve us as daughters of the diaspora to reconnect with our lineage, wisdom, and traditions, it isn't an educational class, right? They will be offerings that I'll be serving the collective in the future, but more so inclined towards those of us that are coming out of this psychic closet, so to speak. Those of us that are weaving our sacred gifts and abilities into the tapestry of our lives, our professions, our interpersonal relationships, our social healing and transformative justice work. As a side note, I will suggest that you sign up to the newsletter, the House of Iyami newsletter, which can be found in link in the bio of this podcast episode. For those of you that are interested in learning about who these arcane feminine forces are. But historically and in post-colonial Africa, these stately and reserved women of Ajer are feared and revered in Yoruba society. Commonly and erroneously, they are defined as witches. That's because the narrative on the cosmic mothers, the originators of this primordial force, have been skewed and distorted due to colonial demonization of African spiritual traditions, but also specifically because of the seed of patriarchal power. The force of domination really sought to subordinate and strip the continent of the matriarchal spirit. To a degree, this is why this podcast needed to be birthed as a portal of reclamation that weaves our stories together, our truths that will make our great mothers beam with pride. Because for too long, so many of us have shrouded our gifts for fear of judgment and ridicule. And I believe that it is through our vulnerability that our gifts seek passage. And this is what brought me to question what was truly needed in partnership with decolonizing our mind, body, and spirit to expand our strategies of liberation, to provide an anchor and a constellation of care to enable and empower us into coming out of the closet. For me, the answer became steadily clear. The way to counter the ridicule and the fear was actually to tether and reconnect with our ancestral truths, right? To lean into the work of ritual and ceremony, of utilizing earth-based technologies for healing. When I speak to earth technologies, what I'm speaking to, for those of you that might not be familiar with that terminology, is plant medicines, plant and fungi medicines, elemental ritual, but also somatic and metaphysical modalities, including sound healing, be that theta or African percussionist instruments, crystal work, chakra balancing, ancestral veneration, mediumship, and divination practice. So we really need to broaden our breadth and understanding of the spiritual frameworks and containers and modalities that are inherent to our traditions. Because of the co-opting of capitalism, because of white supremacist appropriation, so many of these modalities are now looked at as new age, when actually they were stolen. They originated with our practices. Now, I want to highlight the fact that, Ifa, as a spiritual divination cosmology, dates back over 5,000 years. Just in comparison to Christianity itself, which is just over 2,000 years, right? So I'm sharing that because the practitioners of Ifa and Yoruba spiritualists, so Iyanifas, Babalawos, these are the names for some of these spiritual practitioners. They encompass traditionally the use of A, divination, B, herbs, C, the use of laying of sacred stones, crystals, all of these traditional modalities have been co-opted. Have the same ones that were demonized have now been co-opted, and we're seeing our medicines being sold back to us. We're seeing it in literal real time now with the quote unquote psychedelic renaissance. We know that indigenous cultures have used plant medicine. Yoruba traditions have too historically. Africa is known for many entheogenic plants, and our spiritualists are not estranged from the use of purging and healing the body from ailments and trauma with a combination and a potent concoction of sacred herbs, plants, and fungi. I really winced the first time that I heard the term woo-woo. It triggered me, but it took me some time to really kind of understand why I was so engulfed with rage after I heard it. And then it clicked. It's an immensely patronizing term that demeans and devalues anything outside of rational, scientific, or quantifiable understanding of spirit, the unseen realms, the quote unquote great mystery, consciousness, and what that is. Anything that science cannot explain, it puts and relegates into a pseudo category, which is intrinsically in alignment with the racist, supremacist subjugation and oppression of our ancestral ways of knowing, relating, healing, and sensing the world. I come from a lineage that is ancient. You know, I mentioned that Ifa as a divinatory system and spiritual cosmology dates back over 5,000 years. But the Yoruba tribe, my tribe, is one of the oldest in the world. It dates back 65,000 years. So even though Ifa as a divination practice had not been formed, our pantheon of Orìkìs, the Iyamis, the cosmology and world sense itself dates back to Egyptian era. I have spent the last handful of years of my adult life grieving this disconnection. It's bittersweet, this reclamation work, because the deeper we root into our histories, our philosophies, sciences, and practices, the more we have to reconcile with what was stolen from us, what was lost. You know, I'm not a shoulda, coulda, woulda person, but I often sit and contemplate how different my life would be now if I grew up alongside some of these traditional practices. Unfortunately, that was disconnected from me. I didn't have the opportunity, you know, and I feel cheated because of this. Myself and those born during the 80s, even before, you know, and I'm talking at least 3 generations of my family were already indoctrinated into Catholicism, you know, so I shunned my abilities much of the time. My interests from a very young age led me to inquire into oracle cards and the tarot. I bought my first pack at 16 and I had to hide them, you know, away from my mum because I was scared. Even now, and you know, I think I'm going to dedicate an episode into speaking specifically about the process of initiation and, you know, my process of coming out of the closet, and how difficult and violent it has been in terms of the ostracization from specific members of my family and the hardships that I've had to bear as I have become more empowered and aligned with the righteousness of the destiny that my ancestors have imagined for me. This is what has led me to birth House of Iyami Aje, and specifically this podcast, because this moment we are in is calling for change. The call for change is palpable and it's urgent. We are in a deep entanglement with crisis, a collective and global crisis that is suffocating so many of us, right? And is inflicting violence primarily on human souls housed in black and brown bodies. The death and decay is mounting. We are in the midst of multiple genocides. It is clear that this patriarchal paradigm, this timeline has expired, and it is time to shift. Our ancestors are galvanizing us to return to our practices, because unknowingly, amidst our struggles for freedom and our fight for inclusion, diversity, equity, and liberation, we collectively have unconsciously colluded with the epistemology of the oppressor. We unknowingly and unconsciously are reinforcing the ontology of our masters. We have adopted their traditions, we've adopted their religion. We continue to fight for equitable seats at their table. But in doing so, we are reinforcing the oppressive narratives and aspirations of hierarchy and wealth hoarding that are keeping us trapped in these toxic arrangements of power. What if we have more to lose in marching forwards towards progress than we do turning around to reclaim and reconnect with all that was lost in our past? So this brings me to share a little bit about Sankofa. The word literally translates to "it is not taboo to fetch what is at risk of being left behind," from the Akan peoples of West Africa. So I'm actually sharing this podcast as I transition from a rebirth. It's been a few months of integrating from one of my most transformative, potent medicine journeys, one that was a final stage of a long 3-4 year initiatory process that has left me feeling quite childlike and vulnerable from the nakedness of shedding all that I have and the unfamiliarity of integrating this new iteration of self. I say this because this is my coming out of the psychic closet in as big and as loud a way as I have ever done, right? And I will be speaking in future podcasts to the challenges and the difficulties of having to reclaim and stand in my truth, having to champion the destiny that my ancestors have imagined for me has meant that I have had to relinquish friendships. It has meant that I have been subject to demonization from members of my own family. But this calling is too big to ignore. My psychic awareness has grown so significantly that if I went to see a mainstream, undecolonized mental health professional and spoke to them about the fact that I, can channel and have conversations with my ancestors, that I hear voices of people that are not in the room, that I'm able to know things before they happen, I would be pathologized. And this is the case for so many women who relinquish and shun their extrasensory abilities. This materialist paradigm likes to categorize and arrange us to fit into neat boxes where we are labeled and identified by our neurodivergences. We are seen as disabled rather than gifted. It is time to shift the narrative, because divergence in all its forms is celebrated in many cultures of the global south. And in fact, it is within our divergence that the qualities of our gifts shine through. So when I reflect on my own personal process of what has been an immensely expansive and transformational voyage of healing, with a route map that has spanned at least 7 years, that has required me to charter the unfamiliar waters of indigenous spiritualization, psychological, emotional, physical decolonization of my mind, body, spirit. It's been a challenging journey. I'm not going to downplay it. A deeply emotional and spiritual undoing, a shedding, a visceral dismantling of the decolonized aspect of my inner lands. And I've called this process, I've named it as it's felt comparable to, although I've not experienced one before, an exorcism, a personal abolition, a decomposting of the internalized colonizer, which we all have inherently. We have an alien invader, a white oppressor living in our heads, living in our minds, our body and our spirit. And it takes this process of decolonization to purge ourselves of it. But it requires examining the intersections within which we live, between white dominant culture, the intersection of capitalism, the Eurocentric hegemony that dominates our education systems, the dogmas of scientific narratives, the propaganda of the media, and also our actual beliefs or religious practices, the celebrities that we aspire to, the ways in which pop culture influences us. All of these aspects amass a vast cognitive empire, and we are all captives on this metaphorical slave ship, my friends. So really, spiritual reclamation work and re-indigenization work is an invitation to meet ourselves in the fields beyond these colonial fences. It is an offering from the spirits to conspire towards our collective decolonial freedoms. It is a practice of intentional intimacy with the dimensions of the unseen. We have historically disavowed the core elements of spiritual literacy that were the anchor and center of our ancestors' worldviews. We've spent too long privileging Eurocentric knowledge systems. We've been shaped by these patriarchal narratives that are reinforcing our own oppression. These times are calling for us to expand our literacy, to question what other languages we need to learn to speak, to bring our freedom into being. How are we being asked to embody our literacies of liberation? What rituals might we practice as lubricants to ease us into shape-shifting into postures of freedom? I'd like to close out this first episode with a playful practice, but a practice that has historically supported me through my journey on this plane. Before I began praying or ancestral veneration, I recited affirmations. I found that the energetic elevation to be quite potent. Somatically, I felt a shift after, I'd be sitting in a 5, 10, 15-minute affirmation meditation practice. Later, as I dove deeper into my decolonization work and reconnected with my Yoruba lineage, I learned that an aspect of Aje is the power to manifest rapidly, to heal through words. Essentially, we're writing spells. And the Yoruba language itself is very animistic in nature. From its symbolism to the intonations and sounds of the actual words when they're pronounced. Listening to indigenous Yoruba can sound like one of our national instruments, which is called the talking drum. And it's called that for a reason, because it mimics the intonations of our words. We also traditionally use a word which many of you will be familiar with called ashe. This is uttered to punctuate what has been said, as to add a potency to it. The potency being to imbue what is said with life force, with spirit, right? To bring it into being. So we would speak a blessing onto someone and finalize it with ashe. More interestingly, also, we have this tradition called Orìkìs. So Orìkìs can be described as praise poetry. It's a cultural practice, again, amongst Yoruba speakers, or Yoruba people of Nigeria. And an Orìkìs is basically... So firstly, it's a word that combines two words. Ori, which means, literally, it means head. But metaphorically, it's an extension of our character, our personality, our destiny, our consciousness, right? Our reason for being here. And ki means to greet or praise. So Orìkìs is basically praising your head or mind, praising your character, praising your consciousness. It's a greeting that affirms your kinship by speaking life into your destiny, essentially. So Orìkìs are created by the elders, normally and traditionally but not, as a hard and fast rule. Traditionally, an Orìkìs is put together by an elder or a parent when a child is born, and it expresses what they hope he or she will become. They vary in length depending on who's writing it or speaking it into being. But the idea is that it illustrates the accomplishments of that person's clan or family, or it, like I said, proclaims what they will be in the future. It's used to invoke, virtuous character character traits of fortitude, perseverance, bravery, and to show love and care from whoever is speaking it into being. So you can see it as a spiritual affirmation or a declaration of who you are and who you are becoming. I like to think about it as a personal hype mantra, because Orìkìs normally are bigging you up, and traditionally they're sung or spoken at naming ceremonies, so when a baby is born, like I said, or important events, milestone celebrations such as weddings, birthdays, funerals, and they are spoken or sung by a family member or an elder, close friend, relative, etc. So I decided to write one for myself to share with you as an inspiration practice. You might like to experiment with writing one for yourself. So, as I mentioned before, Orìkìs can either be sung or spoken, and as my singing voice is not what I'd call the most desirable, I'm going to do you a favor and recite it in dramatic prose form for your enjoyment and entertainment. And I really do hope that it inspires you to create your own. And if you'd like to share yours with me, please go ahead and, do so via my Instagram page, which is House of Iyami Aje. Send me a voice note. Send me over your thoughts in, a written DM. But please remember to credit the origins of this ancient ancestral lineage tradition to the Yoruba people of Nigeria whenever you do share it with people. So I'll cut to the chase soon, but I want to preface my Orìkì sharing by sharing that my full name is in fact Buki Fadipe. Buki means God has added wealth. Fadipe, which is actually derived from Ifa Dipe, can be translated as the oracle has spoken. So I'm sharing this so that you don't think I'm going OTT when I share my Orìkì, because my name is already a testament to the fact that I am a living embodiment of my Yoruba blood lineage. So, drum roll for the Orìkì. Buki of House Fadipe, first of her name, daughter of Bimbola, Nigerian noblewoman. She who has the Ori of Oya and is an initiate of Awon Iyawa. She is the bereaved mother of the galactic guardian and star dog known as Ziggy. Those who know her call her an animal whisperer and protector. She is the voice of her ancestors, a conduit of spirit. She who is devoted to the divine, an oracle of truth, a keeper of crystals and mistress of esoteric Yoruba mysteries. They will call her the way-shower of lost souls, the sorceress of transformation, and the liberator of her lineage. Because she is the breaker of generational chains, a conqueror of colonial curses, a prophetess of justice, a paradigm shifter, an author of revolutionary rituals, and the bestseller of many books. I hope that you enjoyed listening to my Orìkì, and like I said, I really hope it inspires you to write one of your own. Let me know how you get on. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode, and if you have the time and feel inclined, I would really appreciate it if you left a review, if you shared it with a friend or many. I'm a solo entity and would appreciate the exposure and the uplifting of my voice and platform. And I really hope that you will be joining in for the second episode, where I will be in conversation with a guest and we'll be diving into their story of reclamation, empowerment, and the integration of their gifts. All the links to social media, the website, and newsletter are included in the bio of this episode. So I'll bid you farewell till we meet again.